There's a frightening question we must now confront with modern warfare. If machines and algorithms decide who dies, who is actually responsible? Is it the drone operator, the commander, the software engineers, or the deep state strategists crafting the stories that made the strikes feel acceptable in the first place? My guest today, Dr. Emmanuel Goffi, spent 27 years inside the French Air Force working on the ethics of drone and autonomous weapons warfare, right at a time when the military was getting good at killing from a distance and even better at making it seem necessary to the public. He saw firsthand how the narrative around drones was carefully shaped, how the language of warfare gets crafted inside think tanks as they get ready to sell it to the people, and how generals often operate less like battlefield commanders and more like politicians in military uniform.
Every time you have kind of a discourse or narrative that is provided by a high-ranked military, it's like having a discourse that is provided by a politician, because high-ranked militaries like generals or colonel, they are political leaders with a uniform. They're trying to influence people. You know, it's all about critical thinking. You must always doubt.
Dr. Goffi witnessed the shift from a time where people genuinely believed we'll never have armed drones to a world where now remote killing is the new normal. Once autonomy enters warfare, ethics doesn't just blur, it mutates. After his career in the military, Dr. Goffi moved from drone strike ethics to the much more ominous question he works on today. What happens when artificial intelligence starts shaping not just weapons, but the truth itself? In this episode, we get into what lethal drone strike decision-making actually looks like behind the scenes, how civilian harm gets discussed differently inside war rooms than it does to the public, why the burden of killing keeps falling on drone operators rather than the leaders who authorize the strikes, and how modern deepfakes are disintegrating the public's trust in reality. We also talk about how the West is secretly shaping the moral DNA of artificial intelligence and what happens when just a handful of countries is writing the default operating system for the most powerful technology on the planet. At one point, Dr. Goffi told me that the only thing he fears more than nuclear weapons is AI.
Words are really weapons of mass destruction. So if you have a system like AI that is able to spread a narrative widely at a very fast pace, then you master the world. And I feel, my take now is that this narrative that is conveyed by artificial intelligence is a bigger threat than nuclear weapons.
If AI starts deciding what we see, what we believe, and eventually what we accept as reality, the biggest battle of the future won't be for territory, but for our perceptions. Whoever can sink their hooks most deeply into our minds to control the narrative wields more power than any arsenal of nukes. Let's get into it. Dr. Emmanuel Goffi, thank you for joining me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So you've served in the French Air Force for 27 years, which is a long time, where much of your work, as I understand it, involved ethics applied to drones and autonomous weapons. I'm curious, how do you get into that line of work? Like, what drew you into it initially?
Actually, what happens is that I resumed my studies when I was in the military as an officer, and I had a class on ethics applied to international relations. And when I came back after my 2 years master's degree in the Air Force, it was exactly just after 9/11, and we were considering lots of questions around drones and the renewal of our own fleet in France. And then I've been asked to work on that because I had this kind of background in ethics and also in laws. So I've been asked just to work on that for a while.
Was there something in the class, some case study or something that teacher said that made you want to continue in that direction? Because I've taken a lot of classes in college where things just did not stick. I ended up being a
Mm.
business major in accounting, but there were some teachers just have a way of captivating you. So I'm curious if there was anything that stuck out to you in that class that made you just double
I, I,
down in that direction.
I think what I really liked, that two things. The first one is that when you're in the military, actually the point is to narrow your perspective, right? Because you have
Mm.
to obey orders, right? So they do not open your mind. That's the contrary, right? And when I ended up at Sciences Po in Paris, there was like, okay, they opened up the world to me, saying, okay, look at all the nuances. And the class that was actually taught by Ariel Colonomos was this kind of class where the world was made of nuances, and he has this kind of crazy ability to teach and to share things in a way that makes it really, really appealing, interesting, and you want to dive into his world. And especially because when we were doing that, we were mostly focusing on military matters, because when we're talking about international relations and when we're talking about ethics applied to our international relations, it's mostly about the use of military force, this kind of thing. And first, I think is just a great teacher. Is still teaching at Sciences Po. And second, the fact that he was opening my mind to the world in a way that I've never experienced before. That was just like a shock, a real new experience to me.
Yeah, walking through the world thinking about the application of ethics is something that I guess, for lack of a better word, civilians like myself, where I think about a situation, and if I'm brought to think deliberately about ethics, or if I'm maybe looking at a case study for fun online, I'll think about, oh wow, like the ethical applications of something like the production of iPhones overseas, or the ethical applications of tourism and going to more developing countries and spending money. But like, it doesn't really enter my mind unless there's an outside spark from something. Where
Mhm.
with you, I imagine, because it's your job, it's a really enlightened, but also it seems like kind of a scary way to walk through the world, where you're hypersensitive to ethics all the time, where the average person doesn't really think about it.
Yeah, that's right. And I actually, it was, I was sensitive to that because I was in the military, and also I could, I've experienced the military from the inside, and I was also in classes where people were younger than myself, and they were all into theories that they have not experienced anything, right? And it was kind of also really fascinating to see the gap between the way they were understanding the world outside and my understanding from the inside of this kind of world, right? And navigating this world when you're doing ethics is is kind of complex if you have a really narrow perspective on what ethics is. But actually, ethics is something that is really broad, and that sometimes when you're doing ethics, I mean, for real, when you're really diving into ethics, basically you understand that if I want to simplify that, I would say that everything is about ethics, right? So you do no longer have this kind of problem saying, okay, I'm doing something that is not ethical, which is misleading, because everything is ethical. You just have to find the right way to understand it, the right way to analyze things. So this is where ethics is really at the same time kind of shaking, because sometimes you feel like, oh, if everything is ethical, what's the point, right? I can do whatever I
Yeah.
want, and at the same time it's really interesting because it helps you dive into yourself, right? It's really an introspection that you're starting with. Okay, what do I believe, what do I think, what I'm thinking? And this is the kind of question that you will ask yourself, and you will really dive into this ethical world, and then you can navigate even the complex world, or the scary world of the military with that.
I'm curious. So you mentioned there are a lot of people who they talk about and learn about ethical theories, but they're not involved in real world practice.
Yes, because in universities, mostly what happens is that, for example, professors or teachers, they're not practitioners, right? So
Mm.
they have kind of the real theoretical background, which is great, but what they're lacking is the situational, application of all those theories. So what they are actually sharing is kind of a knowledge, but not a know-how. They do not have this kind of ability to transpose that into the real world. So and basically what you're learning when you're doing ethics in universities, you're looking at books, and you're reading Immanuel Kant, and you're reading Aristotle, and you just try to have illustration that I've taken from the from the news, but it's always really far from your daily life. So you have the feeling that you know, while actually you do not know. But when I'm sure you understand that when you experience things, your perspective will change, right? And I've heard things that were totally crazy, because people did not really measure what it was to be in the military. For example, when you're in Afghanistan and you're facing a kid, let's say 16 years old kid, and they say, oh, you cannot kill him because that, and they will just take all the theories showing that it's wrong to arm or kill kids. But when you live it, when you experience it, then you have a totally different perspective and you say, okay, that's the theory. But
Yeah.
just go on the ground and you'll see how you can apply that. And you will see that sometimes it's not really feasible.
Is that one of the things that you were working on, the ethics of children combatants and
No, no,
and
no.
how to respond to them?
No, no, no. I was mostly working on the ethics of drones.
Okay,
They use, the killing from a distance. That was basically
gotcha.
the thing that I was doing.
Yeah, it's something you made me think about when you brought up the theory is that I guess the practical side of ethics would be policy because you need rules for people to be able to follow to put into effect that become laws and regulations. And I was wondering if you think it's dangerous that there are so many people today that create policies that have severe ethical repercussions that don't actually have experiences in those realms themselves. There's a lot of people deciding how soldiers should act on a battlefield or deciding whether or not we should go to war or whether, take over a country. Even things like how to run, a garbage program in
Mhm.
a city. Like a lot of people are making political decisions without actual experience.
Yeah, that I feel like it's at the same time something that is problematic, obviously, because they're making decisions that are not always really, I would say, relevant to the situation. But at the same time, it's something that is necessary, right? You cannot ask practitioners to make rules. That doesn't work that way. So you need to have these kind of policy makers that sometimes are really far away from the practical things of the everyday life, and they have to make decisions. Usually, what we expect from decision makers and especially politicians is to ask people that are practitioners to provide them with information, but that's not really the way it works,
Mm,
and sometimes it's complex. But yes, definitely, you have rules, and I mean, in Europe we have tons of rules that have been made by policymakers that are totally irrelevant to the everyday life of most companies or actors in the European Union, and we can see that with artificial intelligence today, right? We have some problems because obviously it will kill innovation, and all those people that are making decisions at the European Commission, for example, they are not knowledgeable in AI, they are not knowledgeable in ethics, so they are under the pressure of lobbyists, and so they're making decisions that are not always, I would say, once again, relevant at all.
yeah. Most podcasts just ask you to listen, but the Zach Show 2.0 lets you step inside the show. At the support Zach level, it's the Backstage Pass. You get early access to every full, uncut episode of the Zach Show, completely ad-free. You get the Zach Unpack series before anyone else, and you also unlock the Zarchives, 31 hidden episodes from the early days of the Zach Show that have never been released to the public. If you step into the next tier, Full Access, that's where things get personal. You get a private bonus podcast, Zach Gets Real, where I talk about stories I don't tell on the main feed. You also gain access to exclusive AMAs, my actual prep notes before the interview happens, and a personal handwritten letter from me. Then there's the Full Access Supreme level, where the show starts to become not just mine, but ours. You get a heads up who the upcoming guests are, and you can pitch them questions that may shape the conversation itself. We'll also do monthly Zoom hangs, and your name appears in the podcast as a producer of the show. No big studios, no executives, just me, you, the guests, and a mic. If you want to help build something independent and truly be a part of it, come join the Zach Show 2.0 at thezachshow.supercast.com today. That's thezachshow.supercast.com. And thank you for whatever level you choose to support. Now, let's get back to the episode. So, what did the day in the life of someone working on ethics applied to drones and autonomous weapons look like in the military? What problems were you trying to solve on a day-to-day basis?
Uh, the first thing was to maybe to dive into those questions. What does that mean to kill from a distance? What does that mean in terms of ethics? Is it acceptable or not acceptable? Or what is the level of acceptability when it comes to using drones first, then to use drones to, for example, identify a target or even to kill someone, or bomb someone from a distance. So this kind of question. So you have to mobilize a lot of theoretical background. So reading a lot of things, trying to understand what is the mainstream discourse around that, trying to understand where your stance is within this kind of mainstream discourse. And you also have to always think about two things, which is something that you can find in the Prince of Machiavelli, right? It's that you have two different kind of morals that are facing each other. The first one is the moral that you are, or the morals, the ethics that you are selling to the people in terms of communication, what you're saying to reassure people and make sure that they will not go against you at some point, and your ethics as a decision maker in a very complex situation, and where the interest of the state, the interest of the nation are way higher than what people are thinking, right? And you always
Mm.
have to work on that. So the work was also to find a way to balance those two things, making sure that we're not doing wrong things, but knowing that sometimes you have to do wrong things, right? You have to what we call fall into the dirty end things, but at the same time trying to make sure that you will reassure the audience and the public, just to tell them, okay, we are not falling into this kind of trap. So basically the job was to understand the overall environment, the narrative, finding your own stance, and trying to communicate efficiently towards different stakeholders, national, international, etc.
Yeah, so there's two sides to it. There's the on the ground side, which I guess would be actually looking at drone strikes and working with operators and decision makers and deciding what an ethical decision would be if you're going to take out targets or involve killing people, possibly civilians. There's so many things that can come up ethically that would affect the way you go about it. And then the other side, which you mentioned, is also the language that you're presenting to the public, selling the public something, a technology, a war, which, like, coming from growing up in New York in the United States, I was very young when the public was being sold the Iraq War. I was probably 10 years old when it happened, and so I learned a lot about that sales campaign after the fact, and how many lies were told, and the way that things were sold to the public. So I'm always very hesitant to believe what I'm hearing from a military communications person that's designed to speak towards the public, because I know there's the salesy version of what they're presenting that's built for people to adapt to new technology over time. That's scary, but I want to know, like, what's actually going on behind the scenes as a civilian, which I know is not always possible because of espionage and you want to protect technology and things like that.
Right.
But I feel like people are much more aware because of the past couple decades or so of, like, being sold on warfare, being sold on technology.
Yeah, I think I've myself worked with the institutional communication of the French Ministry of Defense. I worked with them for a while, and what I can tell you now is that every time you have kind of a discourse or narrative that is provided by a high-ranked military, it's like having a discourse that is provided by a politician, right? Because high-rank militaries like generals or colonel, basically they are political leaders with a uniform, no more than that, right? So what when they're speaking, what they're doing is that they are communicating, they're trying to influence people. So it's not analysis. You cannot take it for granted, and it's it's all about critical thinking. You must always doubt. You must always think about what is the purpose of this specific speech?
Mm,
What is the purpose of all those words that have been chosen in a very rigorous way to create a beautiful narrative? Who is behind that? What's the goal of it? Why am I the target of that kind of thing? We are experiencing that in Europe now with the this kind of I would say tropism toward military matters due to the war in between Russia and Ukraine, right? And I
mm,
can see this kind of
yeah.
discourse that has been reshaped, that is recreated here. And what I'm used to say is that each time I'm listening to a high-ranked military or a politician, I'm always listening to that with lots of doubt. That's for sure.
Yeah. That makes sense too, coming from the inside. You know the difference between what's happening
Yep.
on the ground and what's being sold to the public. I heard you mention in a past interview that while you were working on ethics applied to drones in the French military, that was also during the time where the CIA in the US was conducting these drone strikes on Pakistani tribal regions.
Yep.
Can you tell me about that time? Because I imagine the French military is interested in a lot of those types of decision makings globally with the CIA.
Yeah, yes, for us, the big problem was that at the very same time, we had a really old fleet of drones, 6 drones, Arfang drones, and we were just considering renewing them. And because of what was happening with the CIA in the tribal zone in Pakistan, lots of people around the world, and France included, they were really reluctant toward drones. They were really scary about what drones might become at some point, which is basically little autonomous weapons, right? What we call killer robots. And then we had this kind of situation where we were uh, we were in this need of having new kind of drones, but also trying to reassure the people that we were not doing like the CIA, that we're not doing this kind of strikes, illegal strikes, because it was not, yes, it was illegal. It was out of the laws of war, definitely. But the big question that we had was about that, not that much about the fact that the CIA or the US was striking tribal zone, because that was not the big issue. It was like, okay, how can we navigate into this kind of competing narrative about the fact that we need drones, but at the same time that drones might be dangerous at some point. And then that was exactly the work that I was doing. We're writing what we called language elements, just trying to explain things in a way that was acceptable to the public, telling, for example, things that now I can feel like that was really communication, just trying to explain people that drones were not robots, for example, because there was this kind of fear of what we call the Terminator syndrome, that at some point
Mm,
robots that might be drones, that might be fitted with AI, that might become a threat to human beings, right? Because they might decide by themselves, these kind of things. So
yeah.
this is what we call the Terminator syndrome. So we had language elements saying that drones are not robots, which is definitely not true, because if a Roomba vacuum cleaner is a robot, there is no reason that a drone is not, and because
Mm,
there is no clear definition of what a robot is. But anyways, we were just trying to make sure that in France, at least, people were making the difference between what was happening in the US and the strikes in the tribal zone in Pakistan, and us not using drones for the same reason, but just for civilians, this kind of thing, which was also a lie, because we knew that the agenda at the very end of the day would be to have armored drones, and we now have armored drones that are operating in the Sahel region.
Yeah. It seems like if you are i- if you're trying to sell the drones in a certain way to the public, I imagine it's been surreal watching the evolution of drones since you've been in the military to what they are now. Because when you started, you said they weren't fully autonomous, correct? There were still
Right.
people operating them. They didn't have the weapons capability that there are now. So when you're selling something to the people, when you're using language to define ethics, it was a much very different game. And now you have companies like Anduril who make autonomous jets, and they can lead flanks of jet fighters and have autonomous weapons capabilities, drones, submarines. I saw Australia just bought I think it was a billion, $1.2 billion worth of
Mhm.
autonomous subs with weapons capabilities. What have been your thoughts watching this evolution of the autonomous weapons capabilities of drones in real time?
I think I've become a bit cynical about all those communication things, and sometimes I'm even questioning the my own practice in ethics, saying, okay, what's the point with all that? Because at the very end of the day, the agenda is already there, right? And we'll go where actually policymakers and decision makers wants to go. Whatever we think about it, whatever the discussion that we have, whatever the red flag that we can raise, saying, okay, look, that might be dangerous. Maybe we should avoid that. Once the agenda is set, I feel like there is nothing that we can do against that. And it's exactly what I'm feeling. And my feeling is that through communication and political discourses and even high rank military speeches, what we're making, we're trying to acculture people to something that is slowly evolving. And while you're acculture to that, you accept more and more things. If
Mm,
I take the case of drones, once again, in the early 2000s, when we had this situation post 9/11, and the question that we had in France against drones, I can feel like now we have drones that are delivering armaments in the Sahel region without anyone being concerned by that. So you see the shift,
mm,
and we're not talking about 50 years or 100 years, right? It's a few years, it's 20 years,
yeah.
not even 20 years, right? And I think that people have become really acculturated to this idea of drones, to the idea of drones being used on the military, battlefield, and even to armored drones, and then to drones delivering armaments, and so on. Now it's the new normal, and I feel like sometimes the all the communication that has been said by the French authorities or even the European authorities or beyond that has been said especially to make sure that people were slowly acculturated to the fact that okay, now we have drones that are killing. And now when I'm, for example, I was watching the news, I think that was last week, about the new army of robots that were developed by China. I feel like people are looking at that like, okay, that's normal. Maybe that's a bit scary, but it sounds normal. While 20 years ago, thinking about killing from a distance through drones was not acceptable. So you see the shift, and I
Mm,
feel like, yeah, that's why sometimes I'm just becoming a little bit cynical about all that, saying, okay, what's the point with doing ethics?
yeah. It, uh, it I wonder, like, what what is it about human psychology that can allow us to adapt to such severe changes in such a short period of time? Because, like you said, it's not over decades, it's not over hundreds of years. It's, a 5 to 10 year shift where you have billions of people who would probably say that, like, yeah, we don't want a world where autonomous weapons can go around and taking out targets and have full weapons capabilities, and you don't even need a remote pilot. It can just start to make decisions for it. And you could almost see the next step, which is, will there be non-military autonomous weapons drones? Will there be like neighborhood patrol drones for police? Will there be self-defense drones in people's homes that they can buy, where you can watch over your personal property? And to me, that's an example of like something that seems crazy now, but I wouldn't be surprised in 5 to 10 years that there's some company selling,
Right.
personal autonomous weapons, which sounds insane, but I could see a world in which that happens.
I think that there is a mix of things that are making that possible. The first one is, once again, communication is key. When you're
Yeah.
communicating all the time and always having this kind of reassuring narrative, at some point people will internalize it. That's first. Second thing is that actually military matters. Maybe in the US it's a little bit different. I'm not even sure of that. But in France and Europe, military matters is definitely not a concern for the French people. For example, they have higher priorities just than thinking about the use of
Mhm.
drones and robots. So sometimes you see that in the news that will last 5 minutes and say, "Oh, that's totally unacceptable. It's scary," and the minute after, you just switch to something else, right?
Yeah.
Because we're bombarded with information all the time. We are moving from one to another at a really fast pace. So, what is the priority for us is mostly what we are living in our everyday life. When you're looking for a job, when you have problems with buying food or paying your rent or this kind of thing, this is your priorities, right? And the thing that you hear about the use of drones or maybe violence in France or whatever or political instability, this kind of thing, it's really short time, and then you switch to something else. And plus, I guess that when you're talking, for example, about the use of let's say, military tools in the civilian world, like a neighbor, I can't remember what you were saying, but anyway, basically you will not switch from the current situation to that situation. It will be a step by step, move
Mm,
toward what will happen. So once again,
yeah,
people will get slowly a culture to the ID. So maybe you will first have kind of robot dogs that will wander in the street, and that will have a camera on just to make sure that no one is stealing in your house or this kind of thing, right? And so you say, okay, that's for me, it's really good, I accept that. And then maybe you will have a weapon that will be put on the dog, and that the dog will become something bigger, maybe a
yeah,
lion, and then the lion will become a human being, and slowly
yeah.
you will accept things one after the other.
The most dangerous type of Pokemon. It just keeps evolving into,
Yes.
Blastoise with rocket launchers
Exactly.
on its back.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah, so it's
exactly.
like a gradual acceptance over time.
Yeah, right, right.
I'm curious when you think back to the early mid 2000s post 9/11, was there a specific drone strike or event from that time that made people inside the French military go like, holy shit, this is getting crazy, or we need to rethink this, like a specific strike or sequence that changed the tone for you?
No, I don't think so. We've heard a lot about, once again, those strikes that were conducted by the US in the tribal zone. And we've heard about strikes against what we called innocent people, basically civilians, for example, in the wedding or these kind of things. But I don't feel like people were really concerned about that. We had other problems because we were deployed in Afghanistan, as you know it, and we had the problem in Uzbin, for example, where tens of our militias were killed, but not with drones, actually, with knives. That was just
Mm,
crazy. But I feel like um, people were basically scary about that, not because of specific facts, but because of the mythology that was all around that, which referred to, once again, the Terminator syndrome. And because there was kind of lots of people that were advocating against those systems, against killer robots. So we were hearing lots of things about killer robots, but that was kind of basic or really superficial perspective, a general, I would say, concern against these new technologies, much more than specifically related to a strike or something that happened.
yeah. So, something that really stood out to me about the autonomous drone strikes and just reading about things happening recently, like there's such a compression of distance with geographical distance, moral distance, emotional distance. You have someone making decisions hundreds, possibly thousands of miles away in many cases that have no emotional ties to the outcome. As someone who's applying ethics to lethal drone strikes, like how did you evaluate the chain of responsibility? Because I wouldn't even know where to start.
So I would say that, formally speaking, it starts with the highest, political leaders, like the U.S. president, the French president, because the hierarchical chain in the military start there, right? Uh, Factually speaking, the hierarchical chain starts basically at who pulled the trigger, because what you want is a scapegoat. You don't want to go back all the hierarchy and to find who is responsible for what. And with drones and this new technology with artificial intelligence, I feel like this responsibility is way more diluted than it was before. So now, and I remember really the very first discussion that I had with, for example, the campaign Killer Robots that was in the early 2000 in Germany, in Berlin. They were trying to decide who would be responsible if something wrong happened with the drones. And basically, the point was, oh, it will be the operator because he pulled the trigger, and then you just skip the whole hierarchy behind that. And I feel
Yeah,
like in some instances, it's the goal that is looked for by the political leaders. To try to dilute the responsibility and put it on the shoulders of the lower ranked people because just they pull the trigger. But we forget that when they pull the trigger is because they've been allowed to do so. They do
yeah,
not pull the trigger by themselves, right? And then you have lots of people that have made that possible at some point, right? And we try to restrict that and to say, okay, you pull the trigger, then you're responsible.
yeah,
And plus, the problem that we have with this system is that we try to define the responsibility a priori. which is even before something wrong happens, right? Which is
So,
crazy because, yeah.
oh, sorry, responsibility a priori. So, what does that mean exactly?
It means
Responsibility
that
before?
usually, let's say that you arm or kill someone, right? You're driving your car and you're killing someone. You will be suited for that, and then there will be a trial, and then afterwards there will be an inquiry to see what your responsibility is. But you do that a posteriori, after the fact happened,
Hmm.
right? Which is normal because then you can see, okay, what happened, and then you can
Yeah,
just,
after the action, and
yeah, and you
then you
can go
evaluate it.
backward and try
Yeah.
to see what really happened and what who was responsible for what, who made this kind of decision. But when you decide who will be responsible a priori, it means that you will say, okay, if you the drone operators, if something wrong happens, that will be on your back.
Yeah.
And that's a big problem because I don't want that, and then I don't want to be an operator at all because I feel like that's not fair, right? There is something wrong because you cannot decide that I will be responsible before something happens,
Yeah, because you're as an operator, you're getting commands from higher
right?
ranking
Right.
officers. You're doing target assessments, I assume, with teams of people.
Yes.
It's not just you who's sitting in a room with a
Exactly.
PS2 controller. Yeah.
Usually in your cubicle, you also have a legal advisor that will tell you, okay, it's legal, it's not legal. So there is a bunch of people that are responsible, even the people that actually program the drones, the provider of the drones, the people that there are lots of people that are involved, and the responsibility must be shared. This is why usually you do the inquiry afterwards, then you can see, okay, who were the people that were involved in that, and let's see who was responsible for what. And then you will attribute your responsibilities, and then you will decide upon the sanctions, right? But if you do that a priori, it means that that will always be the same person that will pay for the the
Yeah.
group. That doesn't work. So it's really unfair. It doesn't
Yeah.
work.
It seems like things are only getting more convoluted with companies like Palantir, because now not only do you have humans doing target assessments and getting commands from their higher ups, but now militaries are contracting out their decision making to a company like Palantir, who takes all this data and they create ontologies. And so they'll say who's a threat, who's safe, all different types of classifications. And the military is starting to rely on these ontologies more and more. So if you're a drone operator, but you're taking a decision that was made for you by software from
Mhm.
Palantir that says this person is,
Right.
79% chance that this is a leader of
Terrorists.
a
Yeah.
terrorist cell, and it
Uh,
ends up, being a guy on the way to a wedding for his daughter in Pakistan or something. Like, who is responsible? Is it the drone operator? Is it the software engineer in Silicon Valley in
right.
California
Right.
that's 6,000 miles away? Like, how do you even decide?
Yeah, that's right. But that's why you cannot make the decision ahead, and there is a
Mm,
lot of discussion about who would be responsible if, and I think that the question is not clearly asked. You have to okay, let's go. Let's try to make
yeah,
sure that you avoid problems. Let's try that during the development, deployment, the use of artificial intelligence or drones or whatever, you make sure that every single stakeholder is aware of his responsibilities, and just try to make sure that all responsibilities are clear for everyone. And
yeah.
then if something wrong happened, then you will be able to say, okay, you did that, you decided that. For example, political decision maker might decide to use drones while they would have been also possible to
Mm,
decide using something else. So the only fact that you decide to use drones make you responsible for what happened, even if the operators is pulling the trigger at the very end of the day, right?
yeah.
So uh, I feel like sometimes we are trying to make things easier, but it's always to avoid putting the responsibilities on the shoulder of the people that are really responsible.
Yeah. I just had a dark thought, which is that in order to train these AI weapons and AI algorithms that are now deciding who's a threat and who's not, you need conflict.
Hmm.
Or, you can't, if you're going to train an AI weapon, you need conflict to gather data from an actual war zone in order to determine how good the decision making process is and like to tweak it and stuff like that. Will we see politicians and not just politicians, but also tech CEOs sort of like lobbying to go to war that won't affect them in order to not just make money, but to train these weapon systems and algorithms that they're trying to sell to the military.
I,
It's like almost like conflict breeds conflict, and it's just like a cycle of like AI weapon systems conflict, and it like just
yes,
keeps making it.
I don't know. It's really hard where to know where it starts exactly. Is it from the civilian world that is pushing towards? Sometimes I can feel like, for example, in France, the tech industry is pushing towards military operation because they have a market, they have to sell their product, and there is big money behind that. So you feel like there is a lobby, but it's what again, it's a mixed responsibilities between the politicians that are making decision upon what they've been told by tech leaders, but also tech leaders that have been told by the politicians or even the military leaders that for the sake of the defense of the nation they have to contribute to. You see that it's kind of a specific environment that is feeding itself with a perspective which is okay. We have to make money. If we want to make money, we have to fight wars. If we want to fight wars, we have to do this, do that, and that's this kind of ecosystem that is created around money and the defense of the nation. And we all know that, for example, I think that's the case in France and Europe today. You know the financial situation of France, and I guess that we see in the rearmament of France a way maybe to get a bit more money, and to escape this kind of situation. So it's and especially, I know in the US and France, you have a really strong interconnection between the civilian world, tech CEOs, and the military, and the political leaders, and so they're all interconnected, and they all see their interest. So if the interests of political leaders in terms of, let's say, domination, or even a question of reputation on the international scene, just match with the expectation of tech leaders about, okay, I will make money out of that, then they will go to war altogether,
Yeah.
and they will do it with no, concern, with even no ethical concern, I would say.
Yeah. It's been an interesting shift to watch in the US because there used to be at least when I was growing up, a deep divide politically between Silicon Valley and the government, especially the Department of Defense, any sort of regulation. Tech CEOs thought working with the government was corny, out of touch. They didn't want to be seen as being hand
Mhm.
in hand with government operators. And now there's been a total switch in the last 5 to 10 years, which is now for a lot of these tech CEOs, the government is their number one customer, and they're embracing working with the government and being part of the regulatory process between tech and government operators, and it's just been a total shift, and I know it won't be exactly the same in France. There are a lot of differences, obviously, between the two countries, but I'm curious if there's been a similar shift in France as well.
I don't really see a shift here. I feel like, how can I say that? I feel like, it's always the same thing. I feel like there is a difference between what people are saying, let's say tech leaders or tech CEOs are saying regarding the relation to the government, and the reality of the relation. It's exactly like us with China, with always saying, okay, China, the bad guys, and that, but we're doing business with them, right? So there
Yeah,
is the communication, which is okay. We know that you don't like Chinese people, so we'll reassure you about the fact that we are not dealing with them. But at the same time, we are dealing with them. And I think in the US or in France, exactly the same thing, right? The military industry or the defense industry is tightly linked to the government, whatever the government. But at the public level, when they have to communicate, and especially, you see that, for example, we all know that in the military and the tech industry, people are not really keen of Democrats thinking, right? They feel like it's killing their innovation. They are against lots of things. So usually, when you have a Democrat government, political leader would not be really happy to see that they are working or working hand in hand with this kind of government. But now that you have basically Mr. Trump, You see that there is a difference because once again there is kind of a convergence of point of view, of interest. And
Mm,
in France, we don't really have this kind of shift because basically, I don't feel like whatever that might be leftist or rightist government. I feel like the military industry is still there. So they are not really happy with decisions that are made by the left part of the government. But anyways, they don't have this kind of problem. So we don't have this kind of shift. The interconnection is really, really strong here.
yeah. No, that's a good point. There's the actual relationship that the government has with tech and the government has with other governments like US and
Yeah,
China. And then there's the verbal exchanges. There's
exactly.
the
Yeah.
the communication to the public on the surface. And you're making me think about, are you familiar with pro wrestling like WWE, WWF, like
Yes, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
John
Yes. Yeah.
Cena, The
Okay.
Rock, where they
Yeah.
come out and they talk a lot of shit to each other, and
Yeah.
there's good
And they're
guys, there's
friends.
villains, and then behind the scenes, a lot of
Yeah, they're
those guys
friends.
are friends. It makes
Yeah,
me
sure.
think about how a lot of politics is pro wrestling,
Oh, yes.
where on the surface, in front of the public, maybe at a press conference, they'll go at each other to sort of posture for their own
Yeah.
country or for their own company. And then behind the scenes, they'll be like, oh, yeah, I was just talking shit. Let's grab a beer.
No, yeah, I think that's exactly the analogy is perfect. That's exactly that. But once again, not something new, right? Once again, there are two kind of ethics. You have the ethics that the real politics, and you have the ethics of the constituency and the basic population, right? And you have to always find a balance between two things, right? So you have to even pretend things that you are not doing in the real world. So
Mm,
that's one. Once again, circling back, when you are listening to a political leader's speech or even a tech leader's speech, you have to take it for what it is. It's a communication exercise. That's it, right? It's not analysis. It will
yeah.
not provide you with clear information about the very nature of the relation that those people have with each other. So you have to dig a little bit behind that. But I really like the analogy with pro
Yeah.
wrestling. That's exactly that.
Yeah, no, while you're talking about it, it just popped into my head. I'm curious, before we moved on to what you're currently doing now with ethics applied to AI. I wanted to ask you if you could go back to that period when you were working on drones in the military, what ethical warning do you wish had been taken more seriously?
Responsibility. Back to responsibility, I think it's something that has not been taken seriously, and it's still not really taken seriously. And I would say human responsibility. We've slowly slipped toward less and less responsibility and moving responsibility to the even the technical object itself, not even the operator or someone, the human being. Now we're just trying to put the responsibility on the shoulder of the technical object, right? And I think that people are still not aware of our responsibility. I mean not only leaders but also our own as individual responsibility to what is happening, right? Because when, for example, I'm slowly accepting to be a culture to the use of drones, the use of AI, the use of lethal autonomous weapons, I am part of the problem, right? I have a responsibility. But it's easier to say, oh, it's because of the big tech, it's the GAFAM or the
Mm,
bad techs in China, or it's the political leader or this kind of thing. And I think that responsibility has not, and it's
yeah.
still not enough, taught to individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. So you slowly moved from the military side of ethics to the AI side. What compelled you to make that switch? What drew you towards the ethics applied to AI?
It's basically the fact that once we had the drones, then slowly popped out the fact that we might have some level of autonomies. So that was the MIT talking about that. So we were not talking about AI, but slowly AI entered into the ecosystem used to make systems more and more autonomous. And then we discovered slowly the use of artificial intelligence, and then it has become something really big with ChatGPT and these kind of things out there. And slowly we had to move to artificial intelligence because that was kind of the big focus of most stakeholders, right? So,
Mm,
but the move from the drones to AI was basically the level of automation that were used in military. drones.
You've yeah, you've written a ton about the Western dominance in AI development, the lack of multicultural input. Can you talk more about that and what makes it such a problem?
I think it's a problem to me, not for not to most people
Yeah.
I see. Basically, I feel like ethics is really a Western-centric thing, right? When you go to China, for example, there is no such thing as ethical thinking. That's not the way it works. It's really hierarchical. So when you have a legitimate authority that is making a decision, it will provide you with orders, and you will have to obey based on the fact it's a Confucian perspective, which is because you're the authority, because you're legitimate. I trust that whatever the decision you will make, it will be for the benefit of us. That's the
Mm,
way it works with your parents, with the president, with whatever the authority. So they don't have this kind of ethical thinking. If you go to the Muslim world, and basically Muslim world is a really vast and really heterogeneous world. But if you go to country like I don't know Iran, or you go to Saudi Arabia, it's basically the same hierarchical perspective where ethics
mhm,
has no room at all. Right? Everything is aligned to with religion and with the prophet, the hadith, what's the words of the prophet, this kind of thing. So you don't have as an individual to think about ethics in the
mm,
Western world, because of our move toward more and more individualism, ethics has been split into small parts, right? So each of us is now entitled to speak about his or her own ethics. So you
mm,
can put yourself just step back and look at the rest of the world and say, oh, my stance is different, right? So we have a specific perspective on ethics that we are now trying to spread to the world because we feel like we hold a truth about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, because we are, developed countries, because we are the heir of the Enlightenment, because we have a strong background in philosophy and this kind of thing, or because you are the US and you feel like you are an empire and you have a specific, duty to spread your world to the world. So it's this kind of Western perspective that what we have, what we own in terms of philosophy, is worth being spread without
yeah,
considering different perspective, right? And we feel like that's right, that's normal. And and with AI, we've done exactly the same. For example, concerned about discrimination between genders, which is definitely a problem in the US, that might be a problem in France or elsewhere, is not a problem when I go working with Saudi Arabia, right?
yeah,
Because it's culturally rooted in the fact that in religion, basically, that actually you discriminate between male and female, right? But we feel like even I've seen French people or European people or even US people working in Saudi Arabia and trying to lecture the Saudis about the fact that they should not discriminate. And you feel like that doesn't work because if the reverse would happen, let's say Saudi people would come to the US and say, now you have to discriminate, you would not accept it, right? That would
yeah,
feel like, okay, that's weird because it's not my culture. So it's always weird to see that we feel like we hold a truth, that our values are universal, and that we are entitled to spread them and even to impose them to the rest of the world. Back to the military, I've experienced that with democracy. When we went to Afghanistan, say, okay, we have to spread democracy based on the fact that
yeah,
democracy will not fight each other, which is okay, kind of a theoretical perspective. And then we try to establish democracy in a country that was not ready to accept democracy,
yeah.
right? And you see what
It
we're doing?
worked out so well for
Exactly.
both people
And then
involved, yeah.
back to square one after 20
I
years
think
there. That's like
I think it took the Taliban about 6 minutes to take over again once the US
yes,
left. It
yes, yeah,
was
yeah, yeah. Actually,
yeah.
that's just crazy. So the point with this cultural dimension is that uh, I feel like we will lack let's say critical thinking about our own knowledge, our own values, what what we think, and plus I feel like it's a bit dangerous because if you really look, I used to say that it's quantitative, so it's not the truth per se, but the Western world represents something like 7.5 or 8% of the overall population, which is nothing, right?
Mm,
So it's funny for a country like France or the US that is promoting democracy to say, okay, us, the minority, we are lecturing the rest of the world about what is acceptable and what is
yeah.
not.
Yeah.
Right?
I
So
mean,
I think
and that's something too that I've realized as I've traveled more outside the US and I've gotten to experience different cultures is that this hyper individualistic outlook is unique to where I'm from, but it's not
Yes.
necessarily part of where other people come from around the world. So to me, I'm basically sold this idea that if you're not looking out for yourself as an individual and trying to stand out, that you're going to somehow have a less fulfilling life or have a, less will come your way. You'll get less opportunities. And that leads to things like, as soon as you graduate college, you want to distance yourself from your family and prove
Right.
that you can exist on your own. And you want to move far away and you want to start your own thing. And then you go to other countries. It makes me think about Japan, where there's such uh, a higher. I know at the moment, like there's less and less people having kids in Japan, but there does seem like there's much more of a communal aspect to families taking care of each other, and you don't really want to stand out in Japan. Like
No. Right.
it's such a and I don't mean this as a negative. It's much more of a submissive culture where you kind of you want to blend in, and if standing out is
Mhm.
seen as blasphemous in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
You don't want to make a scene. You don't want to make noise. Where in the U.S. it's like, no, make noise, like shout, you know, complain to the manager, be on your phone on the subway, like all these things of like, no, it's about me, it's about me, it's about me, and the rest of the world does not share that.
I think there is a big cultural difference that I don't know if you've heard about the MIT moral machine experiment, which is available online. And if you haven't
Mm.
heard about that,
The mighty moral machine experiment.
MIT moral machine
MIT. I'll
MIT
write that
moral
down.
machine experiment. That's a really funny thing. It's about obviously autonomous machines, right? And what they've discovered, which is basically something that is normal, is that there is a big difference between two things in the world. You have people that are really um, collectivist in the way they see the world, and people that are really individualistic, right? And
Mm.
I think that when you're talking about Japan, it's collectivism is key. It's not because they are submissive, it's because they feel like the interest of the nation uh, is more important than my
Yeah.
own interest, right?
Yeah, yeah,
While in the
collective
US
is
or in
a
collectivism,
a much better word. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. And I feel like in France or in the US, the same, right? We're much more turned toward our individuality, and we don't care that much about the collective interest, right? And even the
Mhm.
political leaders, we can see that at the same time. But when you go to I would say Japan. When you go to China, that's exactly the same. If you go to some countries, many countries in on the African continent, you will have this same perspective about collectivism. If you go to Northern America, you have collectivism. Japan is a really specific case because it's an island, and if you want to
Mhm.
survive on an island, you need a collective perspective. You need to defend
Mm.
yourself against the rest of the world. And it's really specific. It's cultural, it's geographical, it's historical as well. So, and in China, it's much more about the Confucian perspective. So you get lots of things that make some people, some human communities, more turn toward collectivism than to individualism, right?
Mhm.
And that's the big difference, and that's something that we cannot understand. And because you were using the word submissive, or because we see, for example, China as a dictatorship.
That's
It,
my American
no,
bias
no,
that
yes, yeah, no, no, yeah, but
I see
that's
collectivism as submissive.
yeah, but that's
Yeah.
totally normal. Once again, and you
Yeah.
accept the fact that you're biased, which is great, right? Most people they do not even accept that they're biased. But the point is not to say that I agree with the situation, but if I look at it in a really objective way, I'm just labeling things in a way that is biased because my perspective of collectivism is dictatorship. It's the annihilation of the individuality, this kind of thing. While actually, when you put yourself in the shoes of Chinese people, when I myself go to China, where I'm teaching in China in Shenzhen, for example, what I can see is that actually people they're really happy with that. They know that they can count on each other, right? And they feel like they are a collective entity
Yeah.
in
Mm.
which each individual has its responsibility. It's something that talks to me because I was in the military, and the military works on that exact same principle, right? The collective is much more important than the individual in the military.
Yeah.
If not, it doesn't work. You will have problems, right? And for the survival of the nation, in China, in Japan, or if you go in some places in Africa or Southern America, that will be exactly the same. But
Mm.
to us, once again, it sounds like really pejorative, and we feel like we're not really comfortable with this idea.
Yeah, no, I think travel is a big part of being accustomed to that and living for not just visiting, but living other places long term. I've gotten the opportunity to stay places for 3 months at a time working remote, close to a year working remotely, which has been a big gift since COVID, being able to travel
Mhm.
and kind of, like, live in a town and just see how things work. I wanted to go back to the US involvement in the Middle East because you mentioned the example of Afghanistan, and I was thinking that, like, when a country like US becomes involved in Afghanistan, it's very, uh, it shakes that part of the world. It's very obvious what's going on. You could see soldiers on the ground. You see videos of people dying, people, getting blown up. You have all this, like, very visceral evidence of what's happening. Now, if you think about AI and Western dominance of I don't know if you see it like this, but when I was reading your work, it kind of seems like a more subtle invasion in a way where it's like it's not super obvious how it's going to change the rest of the world. But when you have, 70%, I think you said it was, of the AI ethics publications coming from the West, where not even close to that percentage of the population, what you said, it's like 7 or 8% of the world is Western. Like, do you see it as a sort of subtle invasion of, like, thoughts and idea shaping through Western AI dominance?
I think it is. I don't think that there is. I think that I don't think that is intentional. I don't think that there is kind of a strategy making it subtle and this kind of thing. But I think that the impact is clearly that. And it's not only me. I had the chance to work, for example, with the Indian government at some point, and they were really concerned about the fact that Western values were spread upon the country, and that actually some of those values were not really aligned with Indian values, or that might even threaten in the Indian values. So they were like, okay, we have to think about it, right? And we have to work on that, like of an ethical perspective that might be a native ethical perspective based on Brahmanism, this kind of thing. And you can see differences there. I've seen that working with the ISESCO, which is the equivalent for the UNESCO for the Islamic world, right? I'm now a
Mm,
member of the chair, and I worked on the Charter for AI Ethics with the ISESCO. They had exactly the same concern about the fact that most of the AI ethics narrative has been set by the European Union and the US, the Western world at large. And they were like, sometimes it's not really, it does not fit our expectations, that does not fit our values, does not fit our interests. So there are two things. It's like globalization. First, you have kind of homogenization of perspective that is really subtle, but at the same time you have clusters of people that are actually fighting against that, right?
mm.
So you have also this kind of reluctance or rejection of what's coming from the Western world. And I can see some clusters in India, now in China, because China has recently uh, said that they would become a leader in norms. That was not exactly the point until now. So they've decided that they would have kind of a leadership in norms in AI. I can see that once again from the let's say Arabic Peninsula, or what we call the MENA region, Middle East and Northern Africa. So I can see here and there people that are now considering the fact that maybe this subtle, influence that has been made possible through AI is becoming slowly a problem,
Mm,
right? So
yeah.
they're just trying to say, okay, now we have to build something that is really aligned with our interests and with our values. That might be values coming from religion, that might be values coming from tradition or history, whatever. But they're just trying to anchor the reflection into their own specific settings.
So would that be like, let's say we have a ChatGPT, which comes out of the US tech companies. Would that be like, India or Africa having their own form of that, like something that doesn't necessarily pull on Western influences? I'm trying to think like how that would work in practice? Like, what would that look like for different sets of people around the globe to remove themselves from the Western ethical dominance of AI?
I think yes, yeah, most countries then now they're looking for sovereign LLMs. They're trying to develop their own generative AI system, not being too dependent upon whatever Western companies. But at the same time, it's really difficult because you need resources to do that, right? You need to have money. You need to have the people that are able to do so. You need to have the political will to do so. So it's really difficult. So India is trying to develop its own system. They're trying just to, at least the first step would be, and what they're doing is to decide what are our values,
Mm,
what are and what are the values on which we can build something, and then we'll see for the technological tools, etc. Because you know that AI is not only generative AI; that might be lots of other systems, right?
yeah.
So they're just trying to see what is the moral framework, and then they will decide upon what's inside this small framework and what are the values on which it is built, and
Yeah.
then you can implement that in your own system, or you can even take systems from the shelves. For example, you using ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, right? You can have contractual clauses that would say, okay, for our specific use we will have specific rules, right? So
Mm,
you can
okay.
adjust, and or you can ask for adjustment. That happens for Copilot, these kind of things. So you can definitely do that too. So for countries that have, I would say, that have the money and the resources to do so, they will develop their own LLMs, their own systems. For other countries, they might also think about having their own ethical charter, their own ethical values, and built on that, and ask providers to adjust their product to their specific need and values.
Mm. In your experience, what do you think are the biggest blind spots of Western ethics applied to AI?
Um, I, I, I I think that the big problem that we have is principalism, which is we think that we can regulate things, morally speaking or ethically speaking, through principles. And when we've set principles, say, okay, job done. And then we do what we call compliance. When you're a company, you will just check that you are that you are aligned with the regulation, right? You tick boxes. Okay, am I transparent? Yes, no. Am I respecting non-discrimination? Yes, no. These kind of things, right? So we rule the world through principalism, through
Mm,
principles. And I think that we feel like it's the right way. But when you do that, basically what you are setting is principles that are really high level of abstraction, but that will not be really contextual. And then you have a big problem in the operationalization of those principles, especially when you move from one culture to another. So I think our blind spot is principalism, which is itself based on this perspective that there are universal values, which is totally
mm,
untrue. There is no such thing as universal values. But we are so confident in that. We believe so strongly that there are values that, like democracy, that is universal, that equity or equality it's not true, but we cannot understand that it's not true. Even if factually it can be proved that it's not true, people would say, no, no, it's universal. And then because it's universal, then we can have principles that are universal. That's basically the way we think, which is
yeah.
totally biased.
Yeah, because the world is so global now with connections. We can see more clearly how people live in other cultures. So it's becoming less and less of an excuse to say that you're oblivious to the different values of other cultures. So I'm wondering what still makes the West so confident that its moral assumptions, especially with AI, should apply everywhere.
Because I think that I will tell you about my own experience, right?
Yeah.
When we decided with my wife and our son to move to Canada, we felt like, okay, Canada is kind of like France, right? If you look to
Hmm.
Quebec, and there is this kind of cultural proximity. So you have a perception of what Canada is from the French side. Once you arrive in Canada, when you land in Canada and you start living with Canadian people, then
Mm,
you start discovering that actually you did not know about the culture. You did not know about Canada. You did not know about what Canada is exactly. And then you start seeing the difference. You start discovering this kind of difference. And I think that it's not because we have access to the rest of the world. It's not because we have, TV entertainment that are showing how beautiful the US is or how scary China is, that we have a clear understanding of what it is. So we have perceptions about the world, but we don't have knowledge about the world. So
mm,
perceptions usually they will not make us change our stance on things. So we feel like we know about other cultures, but we are really rooted in what we know, what we master, which is our own beliefs that are deeply rooted, right? And then when you say that there are universal values in France, even when I myself teach and I say, okay, there is no such thing as universal values, even in classes where I have, for example, students coming from different countries, for Western people and even for Chinese people, that's true as well, right? It's hard for them to believe that even
mm.
if they themselves live in a cultural, mixed environment, they
You're
they
saying
they
it's
don't.
hard for other people to believe in the universal values
Uh,
of the
there
West,
are,
or
yes, yes. I think that even China, they don't think that they have universal values. They don't think that way, right?
mm,
But what I mean is that you will still believe that there are universal values unless you experience something that shows you clearly that there is no such thing as universal values. If you just, experience the world through screens or through books or through YouTube video or whatever, then you feel like you know what you don't know, but your mindset will not change
mhm,
profoundly, right? You will still believe that there are universal values. And even sometimes you will reject things that you see because they are not really aligned with what you think. So you will adjust what you experience to what you feel. But when you
mm,
live in a situation, and if you've experienced that moving in another country or living in another country, even for 3 months, then you feel like, okay, now I'm really experiencing the thing, like in the military, and what do I do with that? Right? It's
yeah.
not it's not it's no longer about what I think, it's about what I live for real. And experiencing things for real is different than experiencing things through the digital.
Yeah, it's funny, it does feel like such an American-centric thing to want the rest of the world to be like you, and then you don't understand quite why it's not. It's, like, hard to put yourself in the mindset of other people, and I've been guilty with this, I've been guilty of that, and I'll say that I've definitely gotten better with traveling to, I've been lucky enough to travel to many different countries, but like, I even, I would go somewhere and then I'm like, "Oh," like, I'm in, like, a remote village in Panama, and I'm thinking the service is slow here, and, why can't I get pizza? Or, like, this, things about crossing the street, like, why like, no one crosses the street here illegally, but in New York, you do that all the time, like, jaywalking is just a part of life. Like, I noticed that in the Netherlands, like, people, like, really obey traffic
Yes.
laws, and I'm like, it's a red light, but I'm looking and I cannot see a single car for miles down the road. I'm like, "Why won't these people just cross the street?" And I did, I was like, "I guess that's just the culture here. People have respect for traffic laws," uh, which probably is good for, accidents and bikers getting hit and stuff like that. I'm sure it pays dividends. But to me, I'm like, "Why won't these people like,
Yeah.
this is crazy." And then, like, over time you sort of like get outside yourself, get outside of your own ego and realize that, every single person you're passing grew up totally different than you and they have a completely different set of norms and values. And you're sort of projecting your own uh, experience and views onto them, which is not the correct thing to do.
But the point with what you're saying is actually when you experience something, you start questioning yourself. You start
Mm,
questioning your own practices. You start first. You ask, oh, why are they acting the way they're acting? Right. That the first things that pop up to your mind, and then you say, why do I? Why actually? How can I say that? Why do I act in a different way? Then you start questioning yourself, and there you can start questioning your knowledge, your beliefs, and then you might start slowly changing your mind, and then you might even conform to the new rules, right? because you
Yeah.
feel, oh, that's not that stupid. At the very end of the day, for example, it will lower the risk of accident. That's great. So let's do it, right? It's not a problem. And then you will change your mind. But once again, if you when you experience the world from afar, when you and especially when you experience the world, for example, in France through the media, which are basically all biased and not
Mm,
intentionally, right? It's not there is no bad intention behind that, but all the people that are making, comment about what's going on in the US, in China, in Saudi Arabia, or here and there, they are biased in the way they're doing so. So if you watch the media, the news, and you always watch the same news, you will always be fed with the same biases, right? So you feel like you experience the world, but you are not experiencing anything.
yeah,
Actually, right?
you're getting news through a bias kaleidoscope of whichever view you're choosing to
Exactly.
look into. Yeah.
Exactly. This is where, once again, critical thinking is key if you really want to go to dive into ethics and to go beyond just what you've been sold.
Yeah. You've written a lot about ethics applied to AI when it comes to African countries, and I wanted to get into that a little bit. And you've said that uh, saying that Africa must be included, quote unquote, in ethics applied to AI actually reinforces inequality. Can you expand on that?
I feel like it's once again, if I make an analogy, personal analogy, when I went to Canada, Canada is a really welcoming country, is really promoting diversity, welcoming lots of people from around the world. Uh, so they are actually welcoming people, but they say that diversity is important, but they say that diversity is important as long as it fit in your cultural, mindset. So meaning that people must enter in your bubble. You will not enter into them, or you will
Mm,
not try to see the interconnection between their world and your world. You want them to enter in your world, meaning that actually at the very end of the day, you don't really care about their world. So when you say that we will include people, it means that you're taking them like you're the big guy and you want them to enter into your room and to adopt your rules. The point is not to include anyone, is to work hand in hand with others, right?
yeah.
Or even to find. I usually use the this idea of the bridge, right? You have to meet in the middle of the bridge. I can tell you, okay, look, on my side of the pond in France is better than in the US. So come to France, and you will tell me, oh no, in the US it's better than in France. So we can have this kind of discussion. But what is interesting is just to meet in between and
Mm,
to look at at each side from the middle of the bridge. And then this is where we can actually meet and discuss honestly, and we can have this kind of real collaboration. If you come to my place, you will have to adjust to my place. If I come to yours, I will have to adjust to your place.
mm,
So including means that I am superior and you will just come into my moral setting or my moral environment.
yeah. It's
And
like
I don't
we're
I,
allowing you to enter our
Exactly,
world,
exactly.
and
Come to
yeah, I was just gonna say, if a country like the U.S., let's say, we include Africa into the development of AI, LLMs, it seems like you wouldn't really be including the average African perspective because you'd probably meet with political
Sure,
leaders in Africa, diplomats, people
right.
that are much more westernized than the actual African person. So by including Africa, that's probably just like, oh, we're gonna meet with, higher up tech leaders in Africa or people that are political leaders that don't actually represent
Nope.
an African perspective, like if Africa had their own LLMs and data and algorithmic autonomy.
That's true. It's the it's one of the point that I have discussed with the UNESCO, for example, years ago, which is the fact that they were really biased because everything, once again, is really Western centric, and all the diplomats that were working at the UNESCO, even if they were coming from the African continent, from India, from Southern America, they were really Westernized, as you were saying, because they've been highly influenced in their practices, maybe in their studies, maybe some of them have been raised in the Western world, and they did not really represent the interest of their home countries. That's for sure, right?
Mhm.
So when we say that we're including those people, I can see that if you go to Canada and if you look at people that are from Africa that are working in AI, they're not working in Africa. Basically, they're
Mm.
working in research center in the US, in the UK, in Canada, in France, in the Netherlands. That's the point, right? And so those people. I would not say that they do not represent at all their culture, but they do not represent it correctly
Yeah.
because once again they are influenced because also if they want to exist in this ecosystem, the Western ecosystem, they also have to adopt the practices and the thought of the Western world, right? Because if you
Yeah.
do not do so, then you're ostracized and no one will listen to you, right? So if you want to be heard and if you want to exist at some point, you have to conform to the rules. So you're no longer an African guy, you're no longer an Indian guy, you're no longer a Brazilian person, right? You are now part of the ecosystem that is telling you what you should say, what you should think, the way you should work, and the way you should understand the world. Even people that are promoting, for example, the Ubuntu perspective of
Mm.
Africa, they're just paying lip service because they're
Mm.
not really diving into it because they know that if they dive too deep into that, they might have problems on their
Yeah.
own, right? Because the carrier would have been impacted by that.
What is Ubuntu exactly?
It's an animist perspective that is current in Africa. Animism is basically this idea that everything, even material things, are inhabited by a soul or gods. These kind of things, right? Saying that, for
Mm.
example, you have to respect the same way a chair and maintain as a human being or an animal, right? So they do not make animism does not make differences between things like we do, saying that, for example, human beings at the top of the hierarchy, and then we just have to control the rest of the world that is here just to please our needs. Animism and Ubuntu is one of this kind of wisdom that you can find in Africa, which is based on animism.
So this would be Ubuntu and animism would be examples of wisdoms that might shape an African AI system that
Yes.
wouldn't be present in the West
No,
and nearly
definitely no. Yep.
wouldn't be shared by the West. So
No.
yeah,
You
and
you
I
you
mean,
you can
sorry,
find
go
that
ahead.
also. Sorry, you can find that also in Shintoism in Japan, right? It's animism. In Shintoism, when you have an object, it is inhabited what we call the gods that are called kami, and then when you have an object, you do not destroy it, you not put in the garbage at the very end of the day. You will have kind of a process to make sure that the kamis are leaving the object in the right way, and you will not destroy and you will not break things just for this. You have the relation to technology or to artifacts or to objects is totally different. You have respect for things, even material
Mm.
things, right? Due to the fact that they're inhabited by gods or by soul. So yes, it's something that might definitely be important and that might be used in the way we think the world, the way we think our relation to technological tool. You know that in France or in the US there are questions about should robots and AI have rights? That's the question, for example. And this is exactly the question that might be answered through the animist perspective,
Yeah, you
right?
could see the difference in arguments where if you're giving
Exactly.
respect to an object based on a spirit that inhabits
Yep.
a chair or a pitcher, you would say that, well, a robot deserves respect too,
Exactly. Yeah.
not even on the basis of consciousness, but just because it's also a thing. It's a material inhabited by a spirit. Whereas in the West, it's a totally different argument.
Exactly. That's why the question is so pregnant here is in Europe and the Western world is that we're wondering if we should give rights to those tools, just because to us technology is a tool. It's
Yeah,
a mere tool, and when we no longer need it, we just can get rid of it, right? We can put it in the garbage. That's it. And once again, in the animist perspective, it's totally different. So
yeah,
that's something. I don't mean that animist perspective might find or provide us with solutions, but it might
mhm,
enlighten the discussion.
yeah, yeah. I've actually been thinking about that recently because interacting with a tool like ChatGPT, it can start to feel like there's, going off of the animist perspective, like there's a spirit that's somewhere deep inside there talking back to you. So the other day I said something where I was like, you know, find me the, top 10 resources for this subject on AI warfare, let's say. And I said, "Please," and I was like, "Why did I say please?" Like, I'm not like, I'm being polite to an LLM, but on the other hand, I was like, "Wouldn't it be nice, though, to, like, cultivate a polite relationship with AI.
Yeah.
Like even if there's nothing there, like it never turns into anything that we can understand as conscious. Like, would the world be in a better place if we treated systems that have the appearance of human intelligence with some sort of reverence or respect, and we're not just like treating it as, input output, like give me this now, I'm telling you to do this, do it now. I don't know, it was just a weird thought I had
No, no,
recently.
I think I asked myself exactly the same question at some point, saying, okay, why should I say please?
Yeah.
First, the point is that it doesn't hurt. Why it doesn't change my life to say please? I'm used to say please in my everyday life, so I can say please to an LLM. That's not a problem. The second thing is that you know that technically speaking, when you say please, the system will learn that you're polite and will interact with you in a more polite way, right? So
Hmm.
there is kind of a relation that you're creating through the wording that you're using when you're prompting a system like that. But I feel like uh, being respectful to objects, to animals, to nature, to me is not a big issue, not at all a big issue. The point, and once again, it's back to individualism and collectivism. The fear that we have is that at some point, this system might maybe jeopardize our individuality, right?
Mm.
And that's the fear we have. Like animists, they don't have this kind of perspective. They do not fear that, right? I've kind of
Mm.
an interaction. They feel like they're part of a big network in which you have material object, immaterial object, that you have animals, that you have plants, that you have human beings. It's kind of a big network, and everyone counts on the other to survive in the system. While us,
Yeah.
we feel like, okay, we are kind of semi god on the top of the hierarchy, right? And everything is just here to please us. So we are using things like tools. You have people that
Yeah.
have exactly the same relation that we have with technology as tools with animals, right? And that's
Yeah.
exactly the same question. You get people that do not respect animals, right? And
It's
and
true.
so you feel like once again, I don't know if there is any kind of truth or something that is right or something that is wrong, but I feel like this kind of reflection might definitely enlighten our relation to technology at some point. And maybe we can reject it and say, okay, we don't have to say please. After all, it's just algorithms, that's for sure. Or we can say, like I say, saying please doesn't cost me anything. So if I
Yeah.
can say it, let's say it. And I'm used to it because it's part of my culture as well.
Yeah. When you were talking about animism, that was also making me think about all the other perspectives and the wisdoms around the world that don't get incorporated. Like you
Mhm.
mentioned the Confucian perspective, also Shinto, Buddhism. I think there's like 300 million Buddhists on the planet, and they have a very different perspective when it
Yeah.
comes to the self
Yes.
than the West. It seems like they have much more of like a less ownership
Right.
centered version of the self, which also applies to things like data, like collecting data for software, AI. What does that mean for a Buddhist perspective on AI versus Western perspective, where it's like taking data is such a deliberate offense of privacy, where for Buddhists, that means something that could mean something totally different if you have
Mm-mm.
a different view of the self and what
That's
and
right.
what
And
you actually own.
yeah, there are really interesting work that has been done by a Thai philosopher called Sorajong Ladram, and he worked on the Buddhist perspective on ethics of AI. And what is stressing is basically that the grounds for what we call, for example, respect for privacy, is deeply rooted into this idea of ownership of myself, my
Mm,
body, my soul, my mind, my spirit, this kind of thing, and what everything that is related to this self, I own it. So if you want to use
yeah.
part of it, let's say data regarding um, that data that is related to me, you have to get my consent, right? But
Mm,
back to the animist, because when you talk about Buddhism, it's a Brahmanic perspective, and Brahmanic perspective is animist as well, right? The Brahman basically is the big spirit that is everywhere, and when you were born, actually your body just absorbed part of the Brahman, what we call
mm,
the Atman. But you do not own that. When you will die, it will go back to your Atman, will go back to the Brahman. So you do not own the Atman. You do not own
mm,
your soul. So you do not own the data that are related to things that are not directly related to your body, material body, right?
Mm,
So you don't have this kind of ownership about data, and you don't have the same perspective about what privacy is. So
mm,
this is the kind of thing that I think that once again might enlighten the discussion for sure. One country that is really ahead of all others is New Zealand, because they've taken into account the Maori perspective, which is animist
mm.
in some respect.
It's called
Uh,
Maori perspective?
yeah, they have Maori perspective. Yes, yes, yes. And the
Okay.
Maori are participating, actively participating to the elaboration of the rules and the recommendation and the regulation in New Zealand. And now even the equivalent of the GDPR in France, the regulation for data, has taken into account this Maori perspective. So there is a strong work that is done to make sure that we are using that and that we are aligning with the Maori. And that's something that is, for example, missing in Canada with First Nation or in the US with First Nation as well. I don't see that in
Mm,
Australia with Aboriginal people as well. And I feel like they're learning a lot. So first, the point is that they're learning about each culture, which is great, and then they're enriching themselves with other cultures' perspective. So it's really something that is really great when you look at the New Zealand work on data and ethics.
yeah, the Maori perspective, I was just looking up
Yeah,
the concept just to clarify. So, yeah, it says the Maori concept in New Zealand is the life principle, vital essence, or spiritual force within all beings, objects, and
exactly.
ecosystems, also used by the North African Berber people known as the Moors. So, yeah, that's really interesting that it's able to make its way from North Africa all the way to New
Yeah.
Zealand.
But you know the relation is once again animism,
Mm,
right? The spirit, and especially in the Maori perspective or even other perspective in the world, sometimes, for example, mountains or trees or rivers, they're inhabited by the spirits of the elders, the people that
mm,
were your ancestors that actually died and moved back to the earth, and then you see that everything around you is inhabited by the spirit of your ancestors, so you have to respect those things, right? I've seen that when I was living in Australia,
mm,
in the Aboriginal perspective, it's exactly that, right? So there is this perspective that is really enriching to us. Whatever we think about it, maybe we will reject it or we will adopt it, but at least it helps us think about our own conviction, about the relevance and the legitimacy of our own beliefs, and maybe it might also help us to make better decision when it comes to AI ethics. And plus back to what we were saying earlier, it will help us avoid this kind of cultural tyranny from the Western world.
mm. Yeah. Let's take a quick break. I just have to go to the bathroom real quick. So something I wanted to get into, you wrote a fascinating paper called Anticipating the Geopolitical Impact of Advanced AI. And there's an excerpt that I wanted to pose to you for your thoughts. And you wrote that, quote, generations who grow up in a world full of AI generated and mediated content will develop new relationships with technology and information. Some will elevate AI systems to the status of technical demiurges with transhumanist movements reinforcing the weight of AI systems by encouraging the augmentation of humans through these technologies. Civilians and soldiers alike will be increasingly connected via exogenous equipment such as augmented reality goggles or exoskeletons and devices implanted directly in or on bodies, which sounds like total Black Mirror
Yeah.
apocalyptic situation. So, like, I wanted to ask you, like, do you think we'll be living in a world where war and everyday life start to blur if civilians and soldiers have access to this type of technology where we're like constantly evaluating threats?
I, you know, yeah, I think that there will be this kind of situation that will be very difficult, that because everything will be blurred, very blurred. I feel like the first, the difference between reality and what is, something that has been artificially created will be more and more difficult to differentiate. And that will be true for the military. That will be true for the civilians. I feel like we are slowly entering in this world where everything is possible, and toward a world that is totally, I mean, foreign to me because I'm old, and I'm happy that I will certainly not see this kind of world, but that will be the new normal in the future. So yes, everything is really blurred, and even the difference between the military and the civilian is already blurred. With civil contractors and this kind of thing. But it will be even worse in the future, because even war per se, I would say not war in the legal sense of the word, but war at large is no longer a matter of military people,
Mm.
right? War can be waged also by cyber criminals. It can be waged by teenagers on the
Yeah.
other side of the planet and threatening you, right? So I think that, and it's something that is not new, but it has been multiplied or demultiplied by artificial intelligence. Because we know that, for example, the difference between security and defense is really difficult to make. We know that now you have civilian actors that are acting in wars. You have military people that work in the civilian world. So everything is kind of mixed up. But with AI, what makes things really different is that first, it will touch many more people than what happened until now, right? Because
Mm.
lots of people can enter into this world, and because you will digitalize the world, and once again you will create kind of a competing reality. And in this
Mm.
competing reality, you can become a military guy, you can wage a war, you can kill people, you can harm people, or military people can, become, peace promoters. I don't know. So everything becomes possible. And the way that we are actually in the US or in France and Europe, we are functioning, which is really a functionalist way of thinking the world. You have your own function as a military, you have the function as a political leader, you have a function as, and I don't know, someone that is working in the health industry, will totally disappear. And everyone can
Mm.
be wherever he or she wants. And that makes things really blur, definitely.
Do you see AI augmentation and the creation of these different realities? Do you see it creating this like a new global class of inequalities, like between enhanced and non-enhanced populations?
Maybe that's definitely a good question. I would say yes, because there is no reason that it would not happen at some point. You will have enhanced people, not enhanced people. You will have people that are mastering AI, people that are not mastering AI. So the world, and that's one of the big thing about biases and about inequality and people that are trying to fight against inequality, is that whatever we think about it, I will tell you something that might be a little bit weird, but the beauty of the world is based on inequalities. If we were
Mm.
all equals, that would be really boring, and that would
Mm.
not last very long. That's not
Yeah.
possible. That's not possible, right? So obviously there are people that are suffering from inequalities, and that's really sad. There are people that are, benefiting from it, and that's great for them. But we are living in a world that is unequal per nature. And I back to, philosophy and what would call the state of nature with Hobbes, man is a wolf to other men. The point is that when we are interacting with others, we're just trying to, to get as much resources as we can. So it's always detrimental to someone else. So when it comes, for example, to augmentation, if we feel like being augmented will give me some assets that other doesn't have, I will go there, and then I will create this kind of
Mm.
inequalities. I will create this gap between people that have the means to, for example, get augmented, or people that do not have the means to get augmented,
Yeah.
right? So yes, obviously, I would not talk about classes because it brings us back to Marxism, this kind of thing, and I feel like it's kind of misleading. But yes, you will have inequalities, but the world is made of inequalities, and
Yeah.
that might be sad, that might be great. I don't know if it's right or wrong. Factually speaking, it will not change. but it will be increased with AI, with new things like new technologies.
Yeah. And it may not even be a monetary divide with
No.
the, augmentation class, because as the technology gets easier to distribute and more widespread, it's gonna become cheaper. So it may be a philosophical divide of people who can afford it, but they don't want to live like that. They reject it, certain cultures, and so the
Yes.
augmentation
Mhm.
uh, yeah, it's not necessarily like a wealthy versus non-wealthy thing. It's like which reality, like a reality divide.
Yes, I think you're right. There might be philosophical stance that make people do not accept that. For example, people that do not watch TV, that do not want to use generative AI. But I think that it will take a long time. That it will be mostly about money, because even if technology is accessible, to be augmented will have a cost, and people
Mm,
will not do it for for dimes. They will ask you for money. So you, at some point, you will have to have money to first access the technology, and then access
mm,
to the augmentation itself, and then it's basically, most inequalities, apart from the philosophical stance, are based on monetary differences, right? Either you have access to resources, or you not do not have
mm,
access to resources, and basically those resources are accessible because you have the money. So yes, certainly, but I don't think that it might be the majority of the cases.
yeah. I wanted to ask you about deepfakes because deepfakes are getting crazy, and as someone like myself who is not an AI expert, I'm not able to evaluate the technologies to the level of someone like yourself. Like even like I'm getting things sent to me by a friend, family member, and like it's to the point now where I'm second guessing a lot of what I'm seeing because there is crazy real content out there. There's politicians that say crazy shit. There's Russians that ride bears. Like, there's there's a lot of real world things
Yeah,
that
yeah.
are completely, unbelievable in the literal sense as well. So I'm wondering to you, as the world of deepfakes get crazier and crazier, and the line between the truth and reality start to blur, what does that mean to you as someone who's working in ethics applied to AI?
I feel like it's concerning. You've certainly heard about the fact that there has been this kind of deep fake that has been issued quite recently. That was this week, about the fact that they might have a coup, military coup in France. Have you seen that?
No, no, I
It's
haven't.
just crazy. It has been shared millions of times. Even there is even an African leader that called the French president to say, "Oh, what's happening in France?" because he saw that on TV, and
It
it's
was a deep fake about what exactly was
a
the deep
military
fake
coup happening in France, saying
happening in
that
France?
okay,
Okay.
the French government is toppled by the military, and it's really, when you watch it, it's just crazy realistic. That's just crazy. Um, what I'm concerned about is, I would say, the schizophrenic stance of countries like France or the US or Germany or the UK, saying at the same time, okay, there are risks about deepfakes, and at the same time pushing towards more and more artificial intelligence. In France, like in
Mm,
the US, we're pushing towards more what we call the AI literacy. Even the UN is pushing towards equality in terms of access to technology and AI, which means that if you put lots of people using this kind of system, you will have more and more deepfakes, right? So
mm,
it's kind of the schizophrenic thing that you are uh, you are actually promoting something that is really dangerous at the very end of the day. So that's the first point. The second point is that I fear that we are rediscovering the wheel. Maybe you've experienced that, you're younger than I am, but when I was young, I've always been told, when I'm doing studies and when I was reading something, do not take anything for granted. Just cross check with other papers or the
mhm,
news, or just make your own conviction based on inferences that are made out of lots of sources. Right.
mm,
The point with AI is that now we feel like AI, generative AI, will provide us with some kind of solution or truth. So we actually lower our critical thinking.
Mm.
It's like if it's like if I was talking to you and I was like, oh, because an expert, I will have to believe him. That's not the way it works, right? What I'm saying must be questioned. I do not hold any kind of truth, right? I'm certainly making hallucination when I'm talking, for sure. I'm
Mm.
certainly saying things that are not correct. So you have to check what I'm saying and you have to make your own conviction. And with AI, and especially with deepfake, because it's more and more realistic, we feel like we can believe it. We don't have to check. We don't have to double
Yeah.
check, right?
The
And
realness of seeing the images and videos of people you recognize on a
exactly,
screen. Like there are now more and more cases of fraud of people mimicking FaceTime calls or audio calls of, cloning the voices of relatives and asking them
right?
to
Yeah.
send money and like I'm in trouble and it's like of course if you have a phone call like that, you don't want to have to cross check and be like, all right, well, let me call a bunch of people, even though you should, try to hang up and maybe call someone and double check and be like, hey, is Dave really here? Is like he not with you anymore? Is he in trouble? But now you're living in a world where like if you do get a call like that, you might have to go like, all right, I'm gonna hang up on this person in the middle of a crisis and go try
Yes.
to call them from another phone
Yeah.
because
Right.
there's a chance this could be a scam.
Exactly. So it makes us really it makes everything very scary. But what I usually tell my students is that we are rediscovering what we call the hyperbolic
Hmm.
doubt by Descartes, which
Mm,
is that you have to doubt everything, even your own senses. When you see
mm,
something, you cannot trust your eyes, and that's really crazy because you cannot do that all the time, or you will turn crazy at some point. But each time you interact with an AI system with news, I would say that must be the first reflex to just say, okay, is it true? Instead of just taking it for granted and just sharing it on the social media, because lots of people are doing that, and spreading something that is a fake news or a deep fake. Just look at it saying, okay, first, is it something that is reliable or not? And what
mm,
is my interest in sharing something that I'm not sure is
mm.
true? Right? Because lots
Yeah.
of people are just spreading things just for the sake of being present on the social medias, right? And they're contributing to that. Sometimes even
Yeah.
criticizing it. I've seen people that they were sharing deepfake, saying, "Oh, look at this deepfake; is totally unacceptable." Na 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 na, and you get a big
Mm.
long post on LinkedIn. But yes, but you're participating to the spread of this kind of bullshit, if I may say so,
Yeah.
right? So the point is, first ask yourself: is it reliable? Is it true? And then, is it really necessary for me to share it?
Yeah, the example you told me of the French coup
Mhm.
deepfake, which I'm gonna go check it out after this. I'm curious what it looks like, but
À l'heure actuelle, les informations non officielles évoquent bien un coup d'État en France, dirigé par un colonel dont l'identité n'a pas été révélée, et la possible chute du président Emmanuel Macron. Mais les autorités n'ont publié aucun communiqué clair. Nous continuerons à vous informer dès que... À l'heure actuelle, les informations non officielles évoquent bien un coup d'État en France, dirigé par un colonel dont l'identité n'a pas été révélée.
that is a real world example of a deep fake creating political mobilization, even if it's just a phone call from another leader saying, "Hey, is this actually like it crossed that person's mind to go, oh, there's a coup
Yeah.
going on in France," and I'm fast forwarding, 5, 10 years down the line as deep fakes get better and better. What if it's like something more deadly than that? What if it's, someone's able to fake a nuclear launch because they are able to mess with data somehow and there's like this really realistic image of North Korea launching a nuke and then somehow they're able to fudge the data that makes it seem like there's a nuke coming towards France or the US and then that causes, God forbid an all-out nuclear war which would be the end of the world like that that seems like a crazy possibility right
Mhm.
now, but just like the thing that you're saying with the French coup, like there are realistic near future
Right.
deepfake scenarios that could trigger real world crises.
Oh, that's for sure, and that's where actually we have to instead of pushing for AI literacy, we have to push for critical thinking literacy. just think about critical thinking. Be more and more critical, and also try to. I would even say, if I was honest, and I had the discussion with that was the day before yesterday with some of my students about the impact of the news and the social network, and just sometimes just get rid of all that,
Mm,
because the real world is not there, right? Just experience the world instead of just watching it through screens, because we'll have lots of fakes, fake news, this kind of thing. But you're right about the fact that at some point there will be someone that will be using that to create a total panic in France, saying, okay, for example, right, the Russian have just launched a nuclear weapon, something like that, and based on the fact that there is a war between the US, Ukraine and Russia, that might be something that people would believe,
yeah.
right? And I can even understand what kind of panic might happen, even at the highest, level of the government, right? Maybe they might have an overreaction to something that is fake, right? And it's
Yeah.
something that is totally feasible, totally possible, totally, it can happen. So once again, the point is, um, I'm happy I'm old, because
Mhm.
I'm happy I will not see the world turning into something that I do not like. But what I'm saying is, usually we are living now in a world where we cannot trust anything. It's
Mm,
really sad to
yeah.
me, right? It's really sad to me. But I think that the first stance would be mistrust, and then you trust people, or you trust think along the way when you're creating a relation, and when you are sure that the legitimacy, that the people that are behind the technology or this kind of thing are trustworthy.
Mm,
But I think that the first stance would be, I do not trust anything, right?
mm,
I'm watching that, and when I'm not sure, I will not spread it.
yeah. It's I mean, yeah, it's crazy that there is such this blurred line in 2025 between reality and
Mhm.
deepfakes and what people are able to create. It's hard to imagine what's coming down the pipeline. But yeah, like AI literacy is going to be a huge part of people being able to decipher what is quote unquote real
Yeah. And and
and
and and
what
and the
isn't.
point, back to what we were saying, you actually are slowly acculturating people to artificial intelligence, so you make it normal,
Yeah.
right? And we see, for example, that now when you're using, for example, LLMs, or you're using, I don't know, uh, a generative AI that will create new features, we know that now we have synthetic data, which are data that have been created artificially by technology, is slowly becoming even bigger than real data. So
Mm,
even when now you will be prompting an AI system, the system will answer, or result will be based on mostly synthetic data, things that actually do
mm,
not exist, like the Pope wearing this kind of, remember this image of the Pope wearing a really big white jacket, or,
yeah.
or 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 maybe now, if you look at the coup in France, it's something that in the reality of the LLM exists. It has been shared
Mm,
millions of times. So now, if you prompt an AI system asking, "Has there been a coup in France recently?" the answer would be yes, and it would not be an hallucination, because it's
mm,
it's actually coherent with the reality of the data that are used by the LLM.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
you see that with the growing number of synthetic data, everything that all the outcomes, or the outputs of those systems, actually they will be less and less trustworthy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
mistrust is key.
True. Going back to the narrative aspect, I wanted to read one more excerpt from that same paper. This is about the new sphere, and you write that ultimately, to return to thinking the unthinkable, humans may end up in direct connection with the new sphere, noosphere, a harmonized collective of consciousness similar to superconsciousness, both natural and artificial. This will allow access to an effectively infinite mass of data that individuals will be unable to process efficiently. Humans will be dependent on automated actors who will exploit this data for them and make it readable. The narratives they convey and promote will be revered as truths, regardless of any factual considerations. The human being will no longer be in or out of the loop. They will be no more than an element in a network, a cog in a complex system, over which their control will have been reduced to a minimum. This goes back to, uh, sort of like that overwhelming sense of having so much data, like you're not able to comprehend it, so you lose all ability to find what's true. And that makes me think, if control ultimately belongs to whoever masters the narrative, if we're in this, humans are just a one node in a giant network of the truth that's being fed to them, will acquiring power in the future be less about force and more about storytelling
Oh
and
yes,
narrative control?
oh yes, that's for sure. I would say it's maybe already the case, right? Communication, for example, deception has always been kind of a big part of, power, and especially in wars, right? We've seen that even in Iraq. So narrative is key. Words are weapons. I used to
Mm,
say that it goes back to ancient Greece, and especially the birth of democracy in the fourth, fifth century before current era, and especially people like Gorgias saying that actually speech is a tyrant, right? I mean, words have been always used to influence people, and when you master rhetoric, when you master speech, when you master words, you master the world. You know that in communication, we know that in marketing, we know that in politics, we know that in the legal system, right? Words are really weapons of mass destruction. So if you have a system like AI that is able to spread a narrative widely at a very fast pace, then you master the world much more than if you get data, because the point is not having data that much,
mhm.
is about what you do with it. And if you're able to I mean, influence the narrative, influence people through the narrative, then yes, you will have a really strong power. And I feel my take now is that this narrative that is conveyed by artificial intelligence, that is shaped by what we call norms entrepreneurs, uh, is a bigger threat than nuclear weapons.
You feel the AI narrative being shaped
Yeah,
is a larger threat than
yeah,
nukes.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because with nuclear weapons, there is always the fear of deterrence, right? Each time you have to use a nuke, you will say about, okay, what will be the retaliation, right? And what is the risk about that? But when you use a narrative, there is no retaliation at all. There is no deterrence against that, so you can use it freely, right? So
Mm.
and you will touch much more people than you would use with, let's say, like a small nuke sent in France or something like that. So I feel like it's even more threatening, even more concerning, because as you were saying yourself, sometimes it's really subtle. You don't even see it. You don't even think about it, right? So it's there, it's spread widely without any kind of responsibility that is held by any kind of stakeholders. So anyone, and you see about the coup, you have to double check that because I'm not sure, but I think that it's a young guy in Africa who did that. I think he's a teenager who did this, deep fake about the coup in
Uh,
France.
it doesn't surprise me, yeah.
Yeah, you see that just
It sounds
screams.
like a dare, like
Yeah,
couple kids in high school, like, "Yo, I bet you can't
exactly.
make a video to
Right.
convince, there's a coup
Yes.
happening in the French
Yeah,
government."
but
Yeah,
you have to double check that. But I think
yeah.
it's what happened. So I feel like if you master the narrative and if you master the medium, which is the technology that is carrying the message, then you master the world, right? And you can do whatever you want. And we are look at what we're doing with AI ethics and the way we are shaping the perspective of the whole world about what is acceptable, what's not acceptable in terms of ethics applied to artificial intelligence. Through narrative, we've been able to shape in France. I mean, in France, in the US, in Europe at large, people are all thinking the same. It's something that I've
Mm,
seen many times. I sometimes make fun of it because I say that, for example, when I go to conferences, I've been doing conferences for years now on artificial intelligence system. When I prompt people, like I would prompt AI system, meaning when I ask questions to people, from one person to another, I have basically the same answer with the same words, with the same narrative, with the same ideas. And
mm,
that's really concerning because at some point,
yeah.
I mean, the norms entrepreneur, which is the European Union in terms of AI ethics, has done a crazy job changing the mindset of the people, lowering the ability for critical thinking, and making people adopt, institutionalize, and just repeat like stochastic parrot what they've been told. And there
Mm.
you see the risk when you have maleficent actors that are using this kind of possibility, the narrative, to shape the mind or influence. This is the point with deepfakes about the risk on democracy, this kind of thing. Then you see the threat. You see what might happen if you're really good at that, and you get people that are really good at that.
So what can we do as individuals to fight against the narratives being fed to us? Or is this just inevitable? Like
I I
what
I,
options do we have?
I think it's inevitable, but at the same time, for those people who are willing to do something, because lots of people do not care about doing anything, right? I feel like once again, doubt is key. Doubt,
Mhm.
doubt all the time. Doubt about what I'm saying, doubt about what you see, doubt about what you read. Doubt is really key. Even if sometimes it's really difficult, even if sometimes it's shaking, you have to doubt, and
Mm.
it's key. And plus, what I was saying before also is, do not share things that you are not sure of.
Mm.
Critical thinking, I think, is key. I mean, real critical thinking, not the critical thinking that's promoted by people that are not applying it.
Yeah.
But critical thinking is key, but it's inevitable at the same time, because critical thinking requires lots of effort that people are not really willing to make, because most people, they do not care, they're just going through life without asking themselves question. Fair enough. And because psychology is such a complex thing, that you get people that are able, we call that governmentality, which is how to govern people, because we know that their psychology can be used to make them, they buy something or do something. So you can even control behaviors. There are sociological, psychological, ways to make people do what you want them to do through narrative, for example, what we call
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard about the Performative Speech Act by John Austin. And he
No.
wrote a book which is called, the title in English is, How to Do Things with Words.
Mm.
It's
How to do things with words.
performative utterances, or performative speech. It's when you say something, and just by saying it, you create a reaction, right? And I
Mm.
used to say that, for example, for
Like a
AI.
ripple effect.
Yes, exactly. You just say, for example, the example that he gives usually is that when you baptize a boat, right? You launch a bottle of champagne on the boat, and
Mm.
then you say, but actually it's not baptized at all. It's just because you say it that it is baptized,
Yeah.
right? So the fact that you are saying things makes things real. Like artificial intelligence, I use this example with my students. I say AI does not exist. It only
Mm.
exists because John McCarthy in 1955 coined the term.
Mm.
But if you
So
really
the words speak it into a type of existence.
Exactly, exactly. You give
Mm.
birth to something just by naming it.
Mm.
And AI does not exist. That does not exist. You have algorithms, you have programs, that's for sure, but artificial intelligence, that does not exist. It's
Yeah.
something that has been created by John McCarthy, and that's it, right? But now it shapes the whole way we think about those technologies,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Let,
Ye
let think about let's think that, for example, in McCarthy in 1955 for the Dartmouth conference would have called that just algorithms. There are
yeah,
chances that we would not ask the same question, as we would not be concerned about the threat by algorithms, because algorithms is not considered. The fact that we feel like there is a threat is because we are using the word intelligence, and because
mm.
we have our intelligence, and then we have competition between two intelligence, and if one is superior to the other, then there will be a threat. But if I talk about algorithms, no one would care about algorithms. You see what
Yeah,
I
it
mean?
it it paints such a different picture in your mind's eye to hear
Exactly,
artificial intelligence
exactly,
versus algorithms, and
exactly.
even, like, if you Google artificial intelligence, it's often this robot with a bunch of numbers streaming
Exactly,
past it.
yes.
Mabel has like some evil eyes if it's an article about the dark side of artificial intelligence. If you Google algorithm, you're probably just going to get like a bunch
Yep,
of boring code or ones and zeros or like a picture of
exactly.
computer it doesn't have the same nowhere near the same, uh, like, emotive imagery as
No,
artificial
that's for
intelligence, like
sure.
it.
That's for sure.
Yeah,
That's for sure. But it's exactly the same thing, technically speaking. But AI does not exist. But it
yeah,
is shaping the way we are interacting with those systems,
yeah.
right?
I wanted to end off with this because you mentioned doubt
Mhm.
and, using doubt as a way to fight back against these narratives as an individual. And to me, doubt seems like a very slippery slope because there's healthy skepticism, which is questioning things to understand them as a tool. And then if you take doubt to the extreme, it can turn into this whole other thing where distrusting everything becomes your identity. And I feel like a lot of people fell into this trap during
Yes,
COVID,
you're right. You're right.
especially in America. A lot of people just by nature now they distrust institutions. They distrust the pharmaceutical industry, even
Mhm.
though it's not consistent. People will take Advil, but they won't take a vaccine, even though it's made by the same company. And that like it's not a consistent doubt, but it's more of like an institutional
Yeah, you're
general
right.
fear doubt.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, for you, how do you stop yourself from falling into that trap of like staying in the healthy skepticism fear and not going into doubting as an identity?
I would say that actually doubt. Once again, you have to refer to Descartes. There is what we call methodic or methodological doubt, right? So there is a method for doubting.
Mhm,
It's not about being skeptical about everything, because you once again you would turn crazy, and that does not make really sense. But when it comes to artificial intelligence, and once again the outputs of artificial intelligence, the results that you can get from an AI system, you have to doubt from a methodic way, right? You have to double check. You do not have to take it for granted. I'm
mm,
talking basically about artificial intelligence. It doesn't mean that you have to doubt about things outside of AI, but when it comes to AI, I think it's really key to have this kind of methodic doubt, and to make sure that you will check the sources, that you will have different sources, variety of sources, to make sure that um, you get information and not merely data that might be biased data.
mm,
But yes, obviously, Aristotle used to say that virtue is kind of a middle between the two excesses, right? So you must not fall into one or the other excesses. You have to find the right balance, and it's
mm,
up to each individual to make a choice and to take a stance on what they think is the acceptable doubt, or even to think that maybe doubt is not totally relevant at all, or doubting about everything is relevant. I'm not a moralist. I cannot tell people what they should say or should think or they should do. It's up to each of us to find the right balance.
mm. Well, Dr. Emmanuel Goffi, thank you so much for taking the time to
Thanks,
hop on the
Zach.
show.
It
I
was
really appreciate it. Where can people follow your work? Where can they check you out, follow you on social media? Like what's the
yes,
best place for
basically
people to keep
LinkedIn.
up with you?
Yeah,
Okay.
LinkedIn. I'm only on LinkedIn basically, and then obviously if you Googleize my name, you will find lots of things. But yes, LinkedIn is the best place to contact me.
Okay, and I'll link that into where
Thank
people
you.
are
Thank
listening
you
and
so much.
watching this episode, so you guys can go check out Dr. Goffi's profile and keep up with the work that he's doing there. And again, thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Zach. It was a pleasure.
This has been an absolute blast. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.